Okay, I hope that's everybody in. Those of you who are in time for the robot voice will have heard the reminder that this session is recorded. So welcome to our April POGO Club meeting. Our theme today is about professionalization of procurement workforces around the world, and we've got a brilliant panel for you consisting of Masayuki Omote from the OECD, Nikki Archer from the Scottish Government, and Professor Chris Eukins from George Washington. And they're going to discuss the theme of professionalizing procurement. This is a topic that's come up often in our discussions over the past few years, and I think it's a long-standing concern of many people working in the field of procurement. There's this sort of enduring sense, isn't there, that procurement is a different sort of skill set to other civil service type skill sets, so very different to policy analysis and policy development work, for example. But of course, given the changing shape of government and increasing emphasis on contracting out and so on, it's a core skill really that lots of people need to have in order to be able to do their jobs effectively. So it's maybe a neglected skill that needs to come more to the forefront. And I think professionalization, which is what a lot of our participants are going to be talking about, is crucial to both to improving the morale of some really hardworking and innovative and clever and enthusiastic people, and also to supporting them in their negotiations and relationships with contractors. So it's a really important topic. It's what makes all the legal stuff and the policy stuff work, the people who actually have to deliver it on the ground. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Masayuki Omote from the OECD. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anne, for the nice introduction and nice introduction. And good morning and good afternoon or good evening, everyone, wherever you are in this world. And first of all, thank you very much for joining us today. And also, in particular, thank you very much for the POGO Club at the Oxford University to give us the opportunity to present our paper, which was published 2 months ago. So thank you very much. And now I want to start a short presentation and a 10 minutes presentation about our paper, which was published the end of this January. But I prepared some few slides so that my English with a strong Japanese accent will not harm, anybody in understanding my, English. So that's how I prepared a short presentation. And let me share the screen now. Just a moment. Okay, so I think now everybody can, no, just a moment. Okay, I think now everybody can see my screen, I guess. Okay, thank you very much. So, okay, so let's start the calculation of the 10 minutes from here, if you don't mind. Okay, so anyway, let's start. But before going into our paper, just let us recap why we care about the professionalization of the public procurement workforce, which is obvious to everyone. But in any cases, in one word, capacity and the capability of the public procurement workforce is a crucial element of the sound procurement system. That means that even if we have the perfect institutional framework, legal framework, a procurement system, it will not work well without the adequate public procurement officer who actually do the public procurement procedure. So therefore, indeed, the capacity, as you can see here, is one of the 12 pillars of the OECD recommendation on the public procurement, which was adopted 2015. And a little bit more about this context of the professionalization is maybe, we should think about the high expectation toward the public procurement compared with the earlier ages because of the dynamic global trend. For example, before, maybe the primary objective of the public procurement to buy something in the cheapest price in a timely manner. But currently, public procurement has a higher expectation as a strategic instrument for achieving the government policy goals, such as SDGs. The climate, fighting against the climate change, promoting SME, or promoting innovation, or promoting the RBC, or these kind of things. In addition, public procurement has played or continued to play key roles to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. So what does it imply to the procurement officials is that these dynamic situation, global trend, require more complex skill set for the public procurement to be used as a strategic tools. And not only for the technical knowledge and skill, like registration knowledge or setting up the contract award criteria, but also soft skills such as project management or negotiation. And under this background, so the OECD, we thought that it might be beneficial to have some short paper to guide a policymaker in how to advance the professionalization reforms. And that's how we prepared and wrote this paper, which as you can see here. And this slide basically summarizes everything about this paper and on how to professionalize the public procurement workforce. And we identified three big steps. First step is assessment, or to know the current situation. And second step, based upon this, developing some goals or specific action in the form of the strategy or action plan. And then implement the specific reforms to identify, to tackle against some weakness, as you can see here. And if I can explain one by one very briefly, for the first step or the assessment, yes, if we want to start to think about the professionalizing the public procurement workforce reform, it's very important to know the current situation and to identify the challenges and to know what the program are behind relating to the public procurement workforce. And in order to analyze the current state of play, we proposed the two assessment angles. First angle is the system of the professionalization. For example, how the legal framework talk about the professionalization, if there is a strategy of the professionalization, if there's a well-organized capacity building system, or if the country has a competency model or certification framework, and if so, how? And this is what I mean by the system of the professionalization. But also the second angle, which is more micro level, is to measure the actual capability level of the public procurement workforce. For example, let's say about the competence or tasks of the setting up the contract or the criteria. What might be the average level of the public procurement workforce at the certain organization or even at the national level? For example, it should be maybe it could be the basic or advanced. So this is basically what we proposed, the two angles in order to analyze the current state of play of the professionalization. And in the paper, we also provided some kind of the useful tools to help the policymaker to do the analysis from these two angles. For the first point of the system of the professionalization, definitely the sub-modules of the professionalization of the maps might be really the nice tools to diagnose the current situation of the professionalization. And also this structure of this policy paper itself will also have some insight on what they have to look at when they want to understand better about the system of the professionalization. About the second point of the capacity building, measuring the capability level, definitely we should mention that the Procurement EU should be the very useful tools. For those who have never heard about the Procurement, this is a European competency models, metric model for the European competency models for the public procurement officials, published by the European Commission 2 years ago. And the Procurement provide many useful tools, not only the competency matrix consisting of the 30 competencies required for the public procurement, but also the specific questionnaires and analytical tools to measure the capability level of these 30 competencies, identified as the necessary competencies for the public procurement workforce. So I think this is briefly about the step one. And then if I can go to the step two, which is more straightforward. So now we know the current situation and we know the challenges. So based upon this, country could develop the strategy that specifies the goals and also the specific action or initiative to be taken within the specific time. And we call this a professionalization strategy. And within this strategy, we can specify the specific action, and these specific action can be found in the step 3, as we can see here. Competency models, certification framework, capacity building system, incentive mechanism, or collaboration with the knowledge center. And if I can explain briefly one by one, for example, for the competency model and the certification, we have to say that according to the OECD survey of the 2020, more or less 30 to 40% of the OECD country had praised these kind of the schemes of the certification framework or competency model, which might imply that there is still room for the more initiative even across the OECD country. And if I can, maybe for the more details, maybe I want to encourage you to read this section of the paper because this is just less than 10 pages. But if I can say a little bit about the certification framework, even we talk about the certification frameworks, the models of the certification framework vary across the country. For example, for the purposes, there are many purposes. For example, using the certification as a mandatory requirement to work for the public procurement, or using the certification framework to recognize or analyze the skills of the public procurement officer, or both cases. For example, maybe, but in many countries, they tend to use this as some kind of requirement. That means that, for example, in Chile, to have the access to the e-procurement system in Chile, they need to get the certification of the basic level, certify the government of Chile. And in other countries like Lithuania, Croatia, or Serbia, at least one certified staff needs to be in the procurement committee for some kind of the certain kind of the above threshold public procurement procedure. And on the other hand, the country like Norway has a certification framework, but it's more for the acknowledging and recognizing or assessing the levels of the procurement officer rather than making it mandatory to take it to work for the public procurement. So, but for more details, I want to encourage you to read the section of the certification framework and the competency model. But if I can go to the next pillars of the capacity building system, yes, hopefully, once we have the competency model or certification framework, it might be ideal to link the capacity building system with a competency model and the certification framework. And when we talk about the capacity building system, maybe there are two things. Maybe first thing, obviously, is like providing the training. But also, we should be careful and pay attention to the methodological assistant. What I mean by the methodological assistance in this paper is that there are many things. For example, providing the guideline or manuals, setting up the help desk to answer to the question, or even setting up the competence center to provide the practical support to implement such strategic procurement procedure by contracting authority. So this is about the capacity building very briefly. And we also talked about the incentive mechanism because it's very important to retain and recruit the capable procurement staff. And we just divided the incentive into the financial incentive, such as a salary or career burst, and also non-financial incentive, such as award system. I think, and if I can go to the next, the collaboration with the knowledge center. This is about, public procurement authority works with a knowledge center, such as a university or think tank, to promote the professionalization agenda. And there are some examples, such as collaborating with the collaboration for developing training material with a university, or collaboration with the university to organize some kind of research or seminars, such as a topic like saving calculation from the centralized public purchasing. And also we can think about the collaboration in cultivating the future procurement specialists. What I mean this is that to raise the awareness of the public procurement among young people, to recruit the younger people, and to raise awareness of the public procurement among younger people as a potential career for the younger people. And obviously, for example, if we ask the high school student or junior high school student, what do you want to be in the future? Many people might answer that they want to be the football or soccer player, or they want to be a doctor. They might say that they want to be a YouTuber, but almost nobody will say that I want to be the procurement specialist. Why? They don't know. The work of public procurement exists in this world. So it's very important to raise awareness of the procurement works among the younger people to recruit them and cultivate the future specialists. And for this, I think there are many ways, setting up the internship, setting up the coursework within the university, or even setting up the bachelor or master program in collaboration with the university. And I'm glad that we have also the Miss Nikki from the Scotland to talk about the Procurement for Tomorrow. Procurement People for Tomorrow program that we also mentioned as a good practice in the paper. So we are also very looking forward to listening to this. And before closing my presentation and giving the floor back, I also want to mention that the OECD is also very passionate about supporting country in the implementation of the professionalization reform. For example, we talked about the Procurement EU, but 2 years ago, with collaboration with the DG Grow of the European Commission, we piloted the Procurement Tools EU to reform the public procurement professionalization reforms with a selected pilot country, as you can see here. For example, if I can say the example of the Chile, we worked with the Chile Compra, Public Procurement Authority of Chile, to renovate their competency matrix and certification framework by benchmark their Chilean things against the Procurement things in order to renovate and update and modify the Chilean certification framework. So I think that's what we are also doing, and we are very happy to contributing to the global agenda for the professionalization of the public procurement workforce. So I think with this, I think it's already the 1 or 2 minutes past, exceeded my presentation time. I'm so sorry for that. So now I give back the floor to you, Anne. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for a great presentation, very clear. And without further ado, we'll hand straight over to Nikki.
Well, if somebody could please share my slides, that would be fantastic. So I'm going to just focus on that first slide first of all. But before I do, I just want to say we're delighted to have been cited in OECD's paper. Thank you very much for our work in Scotland alongside some others across the world, many of whom we've worked closely with and continue to remain engaged. And I've been asked to drill down into a little bit more about what we're doing to build the procurement capability of our procurement community to ensure that we've got the skills that we need now and in the future to deliver against our ambitions. And my focus as head of profession for procurement and commercial in Scotland is to make sure that we don't just talk in the theory, that we take all that wonderful theory and we implement it in practice. So this first slide is my professionalisation strategy at a glance. I do not expect you to read all the words, it's a takeaway, but what I do want you to take from this picture is, oh, back one please, sorry, is that it's a very holistic approach across a number of pillars to ensure that we're building the capability and impact of our leaders and our practitioners, developing credible advocates and ambassadors for our profession, and helping to raise the profile of what we can deliver through good professional procurement. And that helps ensure that we're at the table. Now, pillar one of our strategy is to attract and create talent at entry levels. And I'm going to drill down into that Procurement People of Tomorrow programme in just a few minutes. And pillar two is what we do to develop and retain our current talent. And again, I will speak to that in just a few minutes. But what I wanted to do quickly before doing that was just to walk quickly through the other pillars to give you a sense of our holistic approach. So in pillar three, we're focused on performance at organisational level, championing a collaborative learning culture that allows the procurement community to thrive, where continuous professional development, cross-team working, continuous improvement, professional accreditation are the norm. And our National Procurement and Commercial Improvement Programme underpins all of that organisational maturity through assessments and continuous improvement programmes. Pillar four is about ensuring we know what good looks like, and we've got the right people in the right place at the right time to deliver the best outcomes, a competent operating environment. And in there, we're talking about working closely across departments and professions to build commercial competence, so commercial awareness and commercial competence of non-procurement people, to create an intelligent client function where early engagement of procurement in the planning and scoping stages of projects is the norm, rather than having them thrown across to us at the last minute to go place a contract. I'm sure nobody's ever experienced that. In pillar five, we've got a wide range of national programmes, tools and approaches to help set clear policy expectations, to set the standards of practice, and to embed consistency of that local practice across Scotland, so that whether you're a council, a health board, a university or a college or a central government organisation, we're using the same national best practice, the same policy, the same tools, and through that we're enabling our community to be, forgive me for using enabling twice, but to enable corporate aims and ambitions, helping to solidify their role, if you like, as trusted advisor and critical friend. Pillar six in red is about, if we do all this stuff, how do you know it's making an impact? So we track the evidence at a local and whole of Scotland level of the impact of procurement. We can't necessarily target measuring the impact of our training and our development, but we can certainly track the impact of our involvement and influence on procurement spend. So we publish our impact and outcomes, and we actively seek ways to continuously improve our policy and our approach. So that means that we publish, we know what contribution our procurement activity makes to our GDP, to our economic activity, to full-time employment across Scotland. We know how much of our spend is retained within Scotland and or Europe, how much is with SMEs, how many of our contracts embed fair work criteria and at least the real living wage and other community benefits, what we're doing in innovation, and of course, critically, whether we're doing it all within budget that are ever decreasing. And finally, underpinning that in purple, we ensure Scotland's trying to share its story with other nations through events like this, benchmarking, stealing shamelessly any good practice we can find and adopting it for our own. So that's just to give you an overview of it truly as a kind of holistic, all-encompassing approach to building the capability and measuring the impact of that. If I can move to the second slide, please. I'm just going to give you some input about what our Procurement People of Tomorrow programme is. Now, we get major issues in procurement, and you mentioned some of them already, my colleague at OECD, where people fall into procurement. And in public procurement in Scotland, we have an ageing population. We've historically struggled to attract people into the profession. So we initiated this programme in 2012. I kicked off 2012 with the aim of positioning procurement as a career of choice and trying to leave a legacy for our profession. So we had three key themes that we worked all of our work around. One was to engage schools, higher and further education and career coaches to raise awareness of procurement as a career of choice, facilitating student and school placements and projects, building targeted careers collateral for students, thinking about their career options, and effectively trying to create a supply pipeline of talent. The second focus was to establish entry schemes into procurement, work with employers to encourage them to actively recruit modern apprentices, undergraduates, graduates, interns, creating that pipeline of placement demand. And then finally, and most importantly, it was to work with academia and accreditation bodies to develop a range of new academic and vocational pathways into our profession. So that includes procurement apprenticeships, undergraduate, graduate and career changer routes. And we recognise not everybody is the same type of learner, so they're not all going to pass, particular exams. So that vocational route was as important as the academic route. And our aspiration, of course, was once we encouraged them into our new and thriving PPOT, Procurement People of Tomorrow community, to have people choosing procurement as a career of choice, but supporting them through the first 4 years of their career with us to make sure they get the best possible experience. They're not just brought in and forgotten about. So I have a whole pack that I can share with you on what we've developed and delivered, but if I could move to the next slide, please. What I will say is we've had a lot of interest and recognition in our journey, and I'm happy to send out that journey. But what's most important is we do now provide a wide range of academic and vocational pathways. We offer support to visit, from visiting professor to student projects, to hosting students at events. We've got a whole range of collateral for people in secondary and tertiary education about careers in procurement, including videos, career advice, school and university packs, case studies, interactive procurement challenges and games. And we've got collateral for employers about how to build, advertise and host effective placements, encouraging them to sign up to our PPOT pledge, which basically commits them as individuals and as organisations to how they're going to give back to the profession. And then, as I say, we run events for our PPOT community across the public sector so they can meet and support each other, and we can do the same, keeping it all open. And most importantly, what I've done here is just show you some of our metrics. What I will say is the age and diversity profile of our procurement team in Scottish Government has changed dramatically. We've brought new skills in and new capability on digitalisation, on new ideas, on types of communications, enthusiasm, a real interest in climate. So that's new skills we're bringing in and we're developing through, and we're tracking what happens with our intakes. So from over the 60 that my organisation alone has taken in since we started this programme in 2012, 52% of new entrants to the scheme have remained in our procurement team, many now being promoted into specialists and senior buyer roles, instrumental during the pandemic. and with 24% being on to promoted posts across SG as Friends of Procurement. So that's a 76% retention rate in Scottish Government. But interestingly, and I haven't put it on the slide and I will for the next time, we've actually had an 80% retention within our procurement team for our 2-year specific procurement schemes. So our specific modern apprenticeship in procurement, our graduate apprenticeship in procurement, those procurement specific schemes over the last 9 years, 80% retention versus the more general government schemes. So that's all I was going to say about Procurement of Tomorrow. I'm going to move on to the final slide. The concept of building and retaining our talent and having standards is really important. So for any of our new or existing staff to make an impact or even be allowed in the door as a trusted and valued advisor, we need to hone their leadership, influencing and negotiation skills and their ability to make sound and reasoned judgments. Procurement obviously needs to be led by people with the required level of training and skills, have the license to practice, and our standards are set through our procurement and commercial competency framework, a national framework which underpins recruitment, skills and career development, and which was used as an exemplar in the development of the European framework, on the steering committee of which I sat. It's assessed through the web, or people can assess their current capabilities and their desired capabilities of the next job they want to go through the web or through an easily accessible app developed by one of our students. And you can use it on your phone or your mobile device, and it allows you to consider the skills and competencies, technical and non-technical, and what you might need to get to the next level. And it's signpost training and development options, which you can extract that info at the click of a button to create a learning plan in Excel. So it's a very useful tool and used heavily across the public sector. It helps people take ownership of their personal development, supporting career planning, and it's mapped to a wide range of industry body standards and accreditation within a Scottish context. But this picture is all about how we manage our talent and create the right environment for our practitioners. We like to think in terms of a career tree versus a career ladder, clear exploration versus career cul-de-sac. So the only option is not to have to wait until somebody moves on with the direction of growth, instead remaining very flexible, with people stepping out onto different branches to gain different experiences or skills or manage different commodities before returning to or trying another branch, keeping them continuously developing and therefore hopefully motivated. And we've got various mechanisms that support that learning and enabling environment. So, the culture of the organisation is critical, and it requires support and investment in CPD, in supporting networks, tools and collaborations. And that includes a focus on secondments, project work, mentoring, and of course, more formal training, accreditation, and if you like, more blended learning opportunities, vocational aspects. We personally, just to finish off, we personally believe there's a massive direct return on the investment in this continuous development and in our credibility and impact as buyers. Even within reduced budgets, this has to remain at the forefront of our minds as leaders. So thank you, that's me. I hope I've fitted in, or I'm just on the cusp of the time I had. Saw the red light flashing, thank you.
Perfect, thank you very much indeed. For again another interesting and very clear presentation. Lots of questions emerging. There'll be an opportunity for audience questions at the end of the presentation, so do please get your thinking caps on and feel free to drop things into the chat too. Now let's hand over to our final panelist, Chris.
Thanks very much, Anne. What I wanted to do was use the OECD, the excellent OECD paper as a jumping off point for talking about different strategies for developing a professionalized workforce, and also use the United States. There's some mention of the United States in the OECD report, but there's a good deal that's going on in the United States that the international community might find interesting. We have a very long history with these problems in the United States. This is a picture from the winter of 1777. The very angry troops on the right-hand side are complaining about the bad contractors who are serving the Continental Army at this point. That's a congressional committee on the left-hand side, and George Washington's in the middle, trying to mollify the soldiers who are very angry about the poor uniforms they're getting. Some of the people in the background, you can see officers standing in the background. The officers would have paid for their own uniforms, so they didn't quite understand why the rank and file were so angry. And that's still true in our military services, that the soldiers who are deployed oftentimes roughly half pay for their own boots before they're deployed because of problems in our procurement system. So ours is not a perfect procurement system. We're still learning. Next slide, please. So I want to focus just on a couple aspects of Masayuki's presentation, the ones that are circled here. And the specifically with regards to if you could just go back one slide, please. I want to talk about the the assessment and the professionalization first, and then give some examples from the United States. What I found in working with procurement systems around the world, that they are at very different stages of development. And what I'm really talking about here, where I'm going to end up with, is two very different models for professionalization that the United States presents. Next slide, please. So in terms of assessments, there are two in the OECD report. There are two possible assessment mechanisms recommended. There's the MAPS, which is on the right-hand side, which is more of an institutional assessment, and then ProcureComp on the left-hand side. ProcureComp has been used heavily in Europe, including in the Austrian program that's profiled at page 68 of the OECD report. I teach in the Austrian program, so I have a sense of it. So to use an example of a professionalization competency in the United States, there right now is an explosion of information in the procurement world, where data is much more readily available, certainly inside the government, on what's going on in procurement, so you can track problems much more effectively. That, for the most part, our professionals are not on top of that, are not ready to deal with that explosion of information. And if you use the institutional assessment, the MAPS assessment on the right-hand side wouldn't necessarily capture that, but a competency assessment, the one used on the left-hand side, that's the ProcureComp, would begin to raise red flags that there's not a digital competency in our professional workforces. So I think while the MAPS approach is incredibly important, of the two, the ProcureComp approach, the focus on competencies, may be an effective way of identifying red flags of serious shortcomings in the professional workforce. Next slide, please. So in terms of framing up the strategy, I want to show you an example of how the U.S. strategy, and specifically in the Defense Department, how that's been shaped by stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement, and this is a chart from the OECD report, stakeholder engagement in the United States includes, in the Defense Department, includes engaging with senior policymakers and with members of Congress to try to get appropriations for procurement workforce training. And that can have a distorting effect on how that training is presented. And I'll give you an example here. Next slide, please. So the Defense Acquisition University is a major institution. I'm going to show you figures in the next couple of slides, but it's a major institution teaching the defense acquisition workforce. And if the OECD does a follow-on report, this Defense Acquisition University would be a very good target for study. The Defense Acquisition University has strategic goals, and they reflect what they refer to as a corporate university. They pride themselves on being one of the best corporate universities in the United States, and they have an ongoing relationship with the students, a lifelong, career-long relationship with the students, in a way that we really can't. In a university, we can't have that lifelong relationship. We have a very intense relationship with the students for a few years, but then the students go into the workforce. They'll circle back to us over the course of the career, but we might not see a student for 3 or 5 or 10 years. It's a different kind of relationship. And so we're talking about overall models here for, let's say, a developing nation that's starting a new approach to procurement professionalization, a corporate university approach, where, as Nikki explained, is very much the case in Scotland, an ongoing relationship to nurture the workers throughout their career is very important. The goal 3 here is cultivate an expert DAU workforce. I've just simply replicated the DAU goals here. DAU does not hire academics. DAU hires people who are less quirky than academics. They're good teachers, they're good trainers, but they put an emphasis on people who are good trainers as opposed to people who might be sort of speaking as an old idiosyncratic professor. They do not want to hire old idiosyncratic professors, and we'll talk about the effect of that in a minute. They also need to build an IT infrastructure, and we can do that in a university environment. We can develop an IT infrastructure sort of as an afterthought, but it's really it's something that's at the core of the strength of the DAU, so that they can reach the students regularly on a remote basis. Next slide, please. So you can see the evolution of the Defense Acquisition University. It was launched in '93, and it's become embedded as a DoD instruction that encompasses it. So the Defense Acquisition University is really run within the ministry. It's run within the Defense Department. That's on the right-hand side you see here, and the DoD instruction captures both the DAU and other capacity building inside the Defense Department in a very, very, very highly structured way. So in terms of, for Nikki and for others looking for examples, this is sort of the ghost of Christmas future, that you see the ministry running this in a very highly structured way, partly to sustain the appropriations, partly to make sure that the appropriations go from year to year. For a while, the DAU was funded based on a tax on framework agreements inside the Defense Department. That's no longer true. They get direct appropriations from Congress. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of scope here, you see the GW budget is that little tiny orange thing on the left-hand side. We're probably, our program is less than $1 million a year. DAU gets about $170 million a year. So it's a mammoth effort. And the look on the right-hand side here, the Defense Acquisition workforce is at about 185,000 people. DAU teaches of that a substantial portion every year. So DAU is really, really engaged with the workforce, and we're teaching only a very small sliver of that every year, even though a significant number of our students are active duty and civilian employees in the various military departments, but we are a very, very tiny slice of all that. Next slide, please. Now, the flip side of it is that we can do things that DAU cannot do. And you just to give an example here, and I'm drawing here from the OECD structure, the Collaboration for Developing Trainings. We work with US agencies, with the United Nations agencies, with the multilateral development banks. We work with state and local officials in developing trainings on a regular basis. And it would be very difficult for a large institution like the Defense Acquisition University to be able to pivot in a very versatile way, in a very flexible way. So I actually really like this, and it's common for Americans to set up two competing models. I really like this two competing models approach because it leaves flexibility so that one of the two models can move to full gaps. We do regular joint research and seminars. We do webinars regularly. We do congressionally mandated research at the Acquisition Innovation Research Center, which is up in Stevens, at the Stevens Institute of Technology in New Jersey. We can work with them effectively and cooperatively, precisely because we're such a small group. We work on model laws through the United Nations and through the American Bar Association. That's a domestic model law that we work on. We work with bar associations that are trying to, the National Bar Association is an African-American focused bar association. We can work with that bar association to improve the diversity of our own bar in a very, very flexible way. We can reach out and do that. We work with academic consortia in Europe, and we work, I said, with various professional organizations. We've actually been officers in those professional organizations in a way that's more difficult for someplace like DAU to coordinate. So I'm a big proponent of having these two models, having a big government model, but also encouraging small enterprises, small institutions at the outside. Last slide, please. I just want to close with another professional example, another historical example. So I started with George Washington. The best history on US procurement is written by a guy named Jim Nagel. He was Jesuit trained. I love this guy to death. He wrote a multi-volume history of government contracting. But Jim's book on Amazon is $200 used. And so I called Jim. I said, "What the hell, Jim?" And I said, "You know, you're going to die and nobody's going to be able to read your book." And so Jim said, "Well, we'll put it in the public domain. We'll make it open source." So in fact, the only authoritative history on our procurement system is now open source. You get a Public Procurement International. I'm nudging to get it into our library. So that kind of advance in the capacity and the history, the academics, the understanding of our own system can only happen if you have a small community of people who have built networks of trust. And that's the lesson I want to leave. It works very well in the United States, and I hope it can work well elsewhere. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. So it's time now for some questions and comments from the audience. And then what we'll do is collect up, as we often do, a batch of questions, and then we will have a final run round our panel in the same order to give them the opportunity to respond to the most interesting or significant points from there. We've got a couple of points in the chat already. Suddenly I've become the big giant head, which is a bit disturbing. Anybody like to come in with a question? Please wave at me or raise your little artificial hand. If not, I'll just start asking questions myself.
You mean the question put on the chat, right? I mean, some kind of the.
So people can come in and ask in person, or they can pop things in the chat, whichever they prefer. Amina, though, has raised a hand.
Hello, thank you
Hi.
for such an inspiring presentation. My question is basically on the implementation of the MAPS assessment. I've noticed that 8 countries in total have been able to implement the MAP assessment. Well, my question is, how long did it take these countries on average to implement the toolkit? And what challenges did they face in general that cuts across all countries, so that, you know, other countries that intend to implement such assessments can improve on those challenges? Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I'm sure Masayuki will want to come back on that. Can we just collect up a few more questions first, please, and then we'll come to you. Any other questions for any of our colleagues? I have a couple myself that I'll throw in. Nikki, I was really interested in what you said about creating a supportive culture among your procurement workforce, and I wondered if, in the context of that, you could maybe say something about enabling people to take risks and do creative and different things. That's been a theme that we've often talked about in this group. So helping people to innovate and do different things, helping them to feel that they can try something out. And so when we get round to the panel again, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I see Malcolm's raised a hand. Malcolm? Malcolm, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Well, you might, it's not unexpected for me to ask a very specific question about the deployment of innovation techniques in public procurement. And I was really interested in Christopher Eukin's analysis, and particularly about the fact that there is an acquisition innovation research center. Yeah, but I saw I quickly looked at it on the website. It was that was very focused on defense innovation research, acquisition research. But I wondered more broadly about, and it really ties into the last question about creativity and innovation, bearing in mind that public procurement is also seen as being an instrument of innovation policy. And in terms of training and developing people's skills, that adds a whole new dimension to the way that it's deployed. And I'm just interested to know whether that is something that will be progressively be picked up in qualification and training programs.
Great question. Thank you, Malcolm. Any other questions? We've got a couple in the chat about interaction with potential suppliers and professionalization there, and also knowledge handover and retaining all the knowledge that people have when they leave the profession. The other thing I'd love to hear about a little bit more is something that Masayuki said right at the beginning of the presentation, that because procurement is now expected to pursue more strategic goals around climate and labour and so on, that's raised the bar in terms of procurement officials' knowledge and expertise and skills, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that issue too from our panelists. Shall we then, if there are no further questions from the audience, shall we then hear a little from, oh, there is, I spoke too soon. See, as soon as you close the opportunity, people appear. Adam,
Hello.
over to you.
Thank you very much for the presentations, and I would like to follow up on Anna's remark on the professionalization in sustainability in a strategic aspect, because from our perspective, basically a crazy person from a procurement unit might become the game changer in the whole organization, which does not focus on sustainability whatsoever. My remark would be that it should not be only the responsibility of the procurement person, and there should be also a sustainability expert within the organization, not necessarily within the procurement unit, to which the procurement professionals can talk to. That's basically the problem, because to find someone like that, to find an expert person within the organization on sustainability issues is actually quite an issue, and it should really go hand in hand. Focus on sustainability of the organization on one hand, and focus on development of skills necessary for the procurement experts as well. And that would be my final remark, and I will not take any more of your time. Thank you.
That's a great challenge. Thank you, Adam. Okay, so let's hear now briefly in a couple of minutes from each of our panelists. You probably won't be able to respond to every one of those points and comments and questions, but pick the ones that interest you, that you want to talk about. So we'll go back in the order that we went in before. So Masayuki, over to you first.
Okay, thank you, Anne. So maybe I want to respond to the training to the stakeholder, including the economic operator and also any other stakeholder, and also even the things that I think Adam just started to mention. And also I want to take the question about the MAPS professionalization modules things. Okay, so to answer to the first question, to make my comment, yes, I think that definitely that many countries are providing also the training to the economic operator. There are many ranges, such as how to use a procurement system, because this is very important for them, or how to be competitive in the tender procedure. Many countries I think is working on to provide some kind of training, or even provide some kind of guidance to help the economic operator to be more competitive and to get more chance to get the public contract. But I mean that in terms of the capacity building or professionalization, I think, yes, not only for the professional, public procurement professional and economic operator, also we need a professionalization or some kind of the capacity building with other key stakeholders in the public procurement. As Adam mentioned, definitely I think the end user or some technical part of the organization is very important, and also some other key stakeholders such as the senior management of the organization or even the control body is very important. For example, if sometimes there's an issue that the senior management or top person of the organization do not understand the strategic aspect or relevance of the procurement. So therefore, it's sometimes quite difficult to use get understanding from the CEO to use the public procurement to pursue this kind of the strategic goals. And also it's the same with maybe some kind of the audit controls, because generally in some country, audit bodies generally tend to be avoid very innovative schemes such as the innovation procurement, which might not be subject to the traditional procurement procedure. So I mean that not only to the economic competitor, which is very important, but also the professionalization should come to all the key stakeholders. I mean, as I told you, the senior management of the organization, or maybe the audit body or the end users within the same organization, so that they understand correctly the strategic use of the procurement and also the basic principles of the procurement. And also, as a second question on the MAPS assessment, basically for the professionalization sub-modules, so far, I think only Peru has carried out this professionalization module. And in case of the Peru, it took about 4 months to complete the whole assessment, built upon the framework of the MAPS professionalization sub-modules. And I think that's what I can say, but I'm not sure, but we have here the Nicolas Penago, who is the secretariat of the head of the secretariat of the MAPS as secretary. So I'm not sure, Nico, if you are there and if you want to add something about the MAPS sub-modules presentation, if we want.
Sure. Thank you, Masayuki. So yeah, just maybe on the question, there have been around, well, more than 50 assessments carried out using MAPS across the world using the 2018 version. And as you said, Peru did the professionalization and Senegal will start, already submitted a concept note to start an assessment using that module. So yeah, in general, 4 to 6 months to do a module is the general timeframe that we are considering. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. So thank you both. Thank you to OECD colleagues for your input. And we'll hand over to Nikki for some concluding thoughts and responses from you.
No problem. I'm going to touch on risk. I'm going to touch on supplier and economic engagement, and I'm going to touch on enablers for climate. On risk, how do we manage a culture of risk taking? You asked me specifically. For a start, we've put every single civil servant in the whole of Scottish Government through mandatory risk training to really understand how to recognise, identify, manage, mitigate, take risk, and how to track them and how to, and all the rest of it. We have reviewed within my team and my directorate our risk appetite on different aspects of what we do. And what I do through my role in setting national legislation and policy is set out the art of what we believe is possible in our national policies and encourage people to go that extra mile, to explore, to do as much as they can do to deliver that social, economic and climate related output. So taking people out of their comfort zones. So there's a number of ways where we're trying to encourage risk and stepping out and learning from the best and supporting people on their common challenges. On the supplier and economic engagement, I think I mentioned in the chat, there's a lot of good supplier training information and collateral out there. I'm already engaged with the likes of NASBO, Chris, and with BBG to look at what we can share, how we can take it forward. And we've got Canada involved in that as well, just to kind of compare and contrast. And I think it's really important that procurement do engage with their economic colleagues, with the local and regional enterprise colleagues who understand those supply chains, not just that we have now, but what we're going to rely on in the future as we move towards net zero or our aspirations for net zero. And they have been absolutely instrumental in working with us to help identify opportunities where we can build more resilience and diversity into our supply chain. And the last point on enablers for climate and where sustainability should sit, I am sorry, I don't think it sits in one organisation. I think it has to be embedded in the way we do business. It's a whole systems approach, or we're just not going to do it. I've got top 9 key enablers that I've identified that I think will help procurement to deliver on Scope 3 emissions. And most of those top 10 enablers sit at, have you got climate related aspects considered in whether you buy within the governance, how much you buy, because that sets off the whole Scope 3, and that's usually your finance colleagues or the users, and what we buy as opposed to just how we buy. So I think there are, you know, and that whole understanding of a circular economy, anyway, there's 9 key enablers that I'm happy to share after this meeting. We are working with our governance, finance and service delivery managers. We believe they can help to enable our work in procurement. Nobody's an expert in this space, nobody. So what we're doing is bringing the players together across the different policy areas, those experts in construction, experts in heat and fleet, to really prioritise our efforts to make the impact. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And Chris, over to you for some final reflections.
Sure. Just on, I wanted to address your question, Anne, on how to encourage innovation. I go through a few of the other ones as well. So what we have a very new approach called other transactions, which basically takes a 2,000 page federal acquisition regulation and throws it out the window. Says you're going to start with a completely clean slate and you're going to negotiate up from that. That creates a lot of career risk for the contracting professionals. And so the answer to your question, Anne, is call them something else. In order to encourage their innovation, some of them are students. They're no longer called contracting officers. They're called agreements officers, because these are other transactions agreements, and they're in this separate box in which they're protected. It's acknowledged that they may make mammoth mistakes, but that's okay because they're no longer contracting officers. We're held to a very high standard. It's okay, they're agreements officers or something else. It's kind of a trick that we're using. It's a bureaucratic trick to give them this protection for innovation. With regards to Malcolm's questions on innovation and how to encourage it, you're right, the AARC is focused on Defense Department research. It's primarily because the funding is coming from and the directions are coming from Congress, and they're focused first on the on defense. To your point on how to encourage innovation, I think Nikki's strategy is the best one, which is to borrow ideas from abroad. Very simple example. Our qualification assessments are based on a bunch of databases that are scattered across the government. The Army is developing a means of gathering that information automatically so that you can do a qualification assessment in 5 minutes, pulling all that information together. And I talked to, it's a former student of ours, I talked to her, I said, well, are you going to turn that around and look at examples such as that's used by the TenderX example that the folks at the Central European University developed, not looking inward, but looking outward. They're gathering qualification information from around the world. And she was kind of startled at that question. But that's the key, is saying, look, this brilliant Hungarian in Vienna, Mishi Fashekas, and his team have developed this outward looking tool. Why aren't you using it? And that question is one that, Malcolm, we can only ask by looking at models from outside our own borders. It's really, really, really key. On the question of the Carol and Nicholas asked about interaction with suppliers, we had an experiment in the 1990s, it collapsed, and then we revived it over the last few years, bringing in mid-career contracts people into our classes. And they're meeting regularly then with their counterparts from industry, and it works very, very well. They have that kind of discussion. It forces us as professors to have a higher level discussion. We just talk about rules and the law. We can't have a discussion that spans all these different domains, and we're able to do it successfully, having that interaction between suppliers and government officials in the classroom. That works very, very well. The knowledge handover question that was raised, the knowledge handover, the answer is 2,000 pages of the Federal Acquisition Regulation. By having highly codified strategies, organizational requirements. The FAR was really developed. The men who fought in World War II, when they came back, because they were fighting World War II, they didn't go to university. They primarily just had high school educations. They joined the acquisition workforce in the growing military industrial complex. They needed very clear instructions on how to operate. And so we've developed this 2,000 page manual, which is the mother manual. And then if you looked at the entire body of regulations, it covers most of a large bookshelf. So that is how we do knowledge transfer from generation to generation. It's all written down. That's the American solution. And on this issue of sustainability, how do you inculcate sustainability? We have that with regards to SMEs. The Small Business Administration spreads officials and representatives across the agencies to make sure that SME goals are met. There is a tension there, though, because as we're trying to focus on professionalization, we're trying to make sure that our professionals do the absolute best they can as procurement officials. They should be focused first on the mission of their agencies. Collateral goals, sustainability, small business, those are collateral goals. The core goal is making sure that the men, women, and children of the country are served as best as possible. That's the core goal. And to professionalize folks, it's very important to be able to focus them on that goal. And so there's attention there and bringing in other goals like sustainability. Thanks very much.
Fantastic, thank you. And a huge thank you to all our panelists for some great contributions today, and to everyone in the audience for your questions and comments and for your participation. That was a really interesting session. We are back next month with a session on public participation in procurement. We have people talking about social enterprises, about VCSCs, about community wish lists. There's going to be all kinds of interesting stuff going on, so please do come along to that. It's the last Tuesday in May. For those of you who would like to stay behind for an unrecorded, more informal chat with our speakers, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'll close the formal session and look forward to seeing you in May. Thank you very much.